And we are now live.
Great. I am calling to order the regular bi-monthly meeting of the Marin Municipal Water District Board of Directors for what day is today? For February 2nd, 2021. And we need a roll call.
Director Bregman,
Here.
Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Russell,
Here.
Director Schmidt,
Here.
and President Kohler.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm now looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move approval for the agenda.
Second.
And before we have a vote, I need to ask if there's any public comment on adopting the agenda.
I do not see any comments at this time.
Thank you.
So,
Roll call vote.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director, Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Gibson. I'm sorry, President Kohler, I apologize.
Old habits die hard.
Sorry about that. I apologize.
Okay, is there any public comment on any item that is not on the agenda?
We do not have any comments at this time.
Then we'll move on to director's announcements. Anybody have any announcements?
I have none.
Okay, seeing none. Ben, do you have any announcements?
I do not.
Okay, we're moving on then to the consent calendar, and I am looking for a motion.
Move approval.
Motion to approve. Second.
Do we have any public comment on the consent calendar?
We do not have any public comments.
Okay, then a roll call vote, please.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. This brings us to item 7 on the regular calendar, the water supply update.
Yes, good evening. Paul Sellier, Operations Director with the Water Supply Update. I'm pleased to maybe begin this report at least with a little bit of good news. Our storage at the time of writing was, 44,415 acre feet. And today our storage is 45,275 acre feet. Not quite time to, have a party, but it is a small amount of good news. January brought with it 7 inches of rain, which is nice, but we normally get, closer to 10, 11 inches in January. February has started off well. We're only, a couple days in and we have 1.1 inches of rain. Unfortunately, our outlook beyond tomorrow is pretty dry through the weekend and into next Tuesday. So at the next board meeting, staff will be bringing an item to the board for approval that will address the ongoing dry conditions. And that's really the extent of my update this evening.
So is that a rain dance?
Yeah, so specifically, we're going to be recommending a declaration of an initial stage and voluntary conservation, voluntary reductions of 20% or something like that. Now, of course, between now and then, the weather forecast could completely change and we would pause on that, but staff is working on pulling that together.
So Jeannie, you probably have this covered, but every time it rains a little, people are like, oh, we're all good. So, it might be useful, be great to hear from you about, because I know you don't really have anything else to do, but what you might, what you might be thinking about in terms of, putting some messaging out, through the website, through the next billing cycle, the next round of bills or social media about, yay for the rain, but this is how far behind we still are. Just
Yeah, we've been doing some of that already, in anticipation of the rain. Just reminding people that, we're not out of the woods and they need to turn off their irrigation systems and things of that nature. So yeah, we've been tracking that closely with Paul and Carrie's team.
Okay, great.
Okay. And I assume that the next month agenda item you're talking about is driven by the April 1st code date?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that with the board. April 1st, potentially, depending on how the outlook looks and how the time between now and April 1st looks, and we'll talk more about it at the next meeting, we could be looking in April at the next step,
Right.
mandatory reductions. Because we're projecting that could be very close to that 40,000 April 1st, which triggers mandatory.
Right.
And it really puts us in a tough position. But I do agree, it's a real opportunity. And Jeannie and I and others have been talking about when we take that action, particularly at the next meeting, if that's where we land, we could do a press release or something like that on this action by the board and really kind of kick off this conservation and, water use efficiency message. And we all know 2020 was among second driest on record or something like that. So it's not a huge surprise where we land, given the nature of we fill up quickly and we empty relatively quickly. So we're probably a bit ahead of other folks in that.
Mhm. And as you know, Sonoma Water is asking for concessions regarding Lake Mendocino. Should we be thinking about, from the State Water Board, should we be thinking about that approach for releases to Lagunitas Creek?
So we'll also be bringing an update on the, I can't remember, 6 or 7 items that we had brought to the board when we were talking about our drought planning. And that is one of them. And we'll give an update. As you know, it's something we've never done in terms of working with the myriad of agencies. So staff is now exploring what that would entail, and we'll be able to provide the start of an update on that particular effort, along with all of the other activities we noted.
Okay.
And could you make sure, or could I ask you to include an update on the releases? We got a summary at TAC at the last meeting from Fisheries.
Anything in particular, Director Bragman, about the releases?
It's a summary of the releases that we've done, because I've mentioned, getting a concession, but when that data was presented, it's pretty eye-opening how important it is. These pulses that we're providing for the habitat. So I just think the discussion needs to include, or the consideration of any such item needs to include that data.
Yes, I go ahead, Ben. It looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, maybe similar to you, that in the update, Director Bragman, it really is just that we are, it's quite a journey to get to our order to changing the required releases. And, there's potentially biological opinions and a tremendous amount of stakeholder discussion and other regulators. So we'll start touching on that, but we'll also bring that other information. Because I understand your point. What we are not trying to rush into doing something that would have the sort of consequences. Obviously, we're talking about reducing releases at the time they're most needed,
right,
for firefighting and potable water consumption. So this is a very thoughtful process we'll have to engage in every aspect of it.
Yeah, and I'm not casting aspersions, because when I saw that presentation, I was very much taken aback.
And any such action would require us to look at the potential impacts to the salmonids that are being protected.
Yeah, thank you for that, Molly. I think, understanding the trade-offs is going to be a really important question. And, there are points at which, a reduction in flow release resulting in significant mortality of a listed species I think that we should really be thinking twice about understanding whether we would be getting into that type of impact, and whether there are other parts of the hydrograph. If we're seeking relief, there may be other parts of flow releases that might be less impactful to fish and might be more beneficial from a water supply perspective. So I would like to see if we're going to explore this pathway, to really look at the sum total of the year and the flow releases, because we can look at it in that way and try to understand if there is a smarter and less impactful to the species in terms of protection way of reducing releases and having some of that water supply benefit.
Yeah, Director Schmidt, and that's a great point. And we are working, our team includes Jonathan Kohler, our fisheries manager, to support us internally with those types of initial discussions. But as Ben said, this is really a feasibility stage at this point, because it really is, it's going to be a longer, it's not a short-term proposal for us.
Yeah, and the state would be looking at any request we made.
Right.
Really, they wouldn't let us get too wild about it, so.
Right.
So one maybe last point on this, if we do wind up going to mandatory restrictions, I just want us to be very thoughtful about how we're dealing with businesses that are only just starting to open and that have really suffered, restaurants, salons, those are, those kinds of small businesses are really essential in the community. So they're also high water users. So I just want to be sure that we're really thinking about minimizing our impact on them in that situation, because they're all still at like 25-30%, and who knows, April, hopefully better, but those are all, we just don't want to add to the burden of
Hopefully their water use drops with their usage. So I would guess they would already be in compliance.
I'm just saying they're all ramping up. So I just want us to be conscious of that and everything they've been through. That's all.
I think an appreciation of all of the comments. What we would probably think about as we bring the voluntary next board meeting is in March, bring concepts and approaches, assuming the weather holds in this pattern. And then based on the direction we receive from the board and the input, we'd be able to fashion what mandatory may look like, particularly in context of where we are in terms of the pandemic and the economic condition.
Okay, great. Do we have any other board comment on this item? Do we have any public commentary?
We do not.
Okay, then I am going to move on with everybody acquiescence to item 8, which is rental of temporary portable generators for Suluhulu.
Yes, good evening. It's me again. So as we just heard our discussion over the continued dry conditions, one of the things that we are preparing to do at staff level is to move Suluhulu water into Nicasio. And to do that, we need to rent 2 1,000 megawatt generators to power the 800 horsepower pumps.
No, 1 megawatt. 1 megawatt.
What did I say?
1,000 kilowatts. You said 1,000
sorry.
kilowatts. 1,000 megawatt.
Yeah, no cities today. Just a pump station. Thank
I would
you.
have caught that myself, but Larry beat me.
Chernobyl levels.
Yeah. So we need these generators to power the pumps, and they're set up out there to require 2 generators so that when we're changing the oil on one, the other can continue operating. And it'll take about 90 days for us to move, 3,000 acre feet or so of water. Staff went out to look for competitive quotes for the generator rental and fueling service. And Sunbelt Rentals, as mentioned in the staff report, was the low cost. And of course, staff have good experience working with Sunbelt Rentals and confidence that they can perform. And so tonight, I'm asking the board for their authorization or approval, rather, to authorize the general manager to negotiate and execute an agreement with Sunbelt Rentals for the rental of temporary portable generators to power Suluhulu Pump Station in an amount of $1,267,748, And that includes a $100,000 contingency, which is really there in the event that fuel prices change drastically on us between now and say July.
Very good
And
move.
we recognize,
Move approval.
When do you have to
I-
pull, when do you have to pull the trigger on this thing?
Yeah, we don't have to pull the trigger. You know, I would say we would be looking at actually pumping probably toward, you know, mid-March, end of March, depending on
mean-
what our forecast looks like.
I mean,
it
I
is
would, I
directed.
would wait until, that's a lot of money. I mean-
It's, I agree.
It's only a lot of money, Larry, if they have to use the pumps, use the generators. The real cost
Well-
isn't fuel. It's 10 times the cost of the generator rental. So the
Oh.
I don't know what the agreement is in the agreement. Does it, I assume if it doesn't get used, that we don't pay the fuel, if we
That's
don't use the
correct.
fuel.
Correct.
So,
Okay.
you know, we're looking
I
at
see.
130,000.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I didn't see that. Good point.
Also, I have a question, Paul.
Yeah.
That seems a little crazy to me to have a second generator there for the time that the oil change occurs. I mean, I don't think we're cutting the needle that closely, are we? That we really need constant pumping? I mean, if
Well-
it's down, it's down, right?
Yeah, no, you could, you know, that's not the only reason. It's just they're set up to pump that way. And as you see, the cost here for these generators is really low from Sunbelt. So it's kind of an
Yes.
operational benefit from us. In fact, most of the competitors, when they saw Sunbelt's, the cost for the equipment, they didn't know how they did that. But Sunbelt are confident they're making it up on the fueling contract.
Sure.
Is there any mandatory minimums on the fuel?
No.
No, well, that's different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like having it parked in the garage. You know, it's ready to go.
Yep.
One question I have, Paul, is, and you probably have looked at this, but what about bringing power in at some point in time?
Yeah, we have looked at it. It was Molly's first question, I think, when we were started talking about this, because who built
Good.
the
She's
pump?
thinking like an engineer. That's
Right. Yeah, no, she's great that way. But yeah, you know, it is an expensive proposition. We would have to, you know, pay for PG&E to bring new conductors several miles into the pump station. And so it's a capital cost that's just one of those things that we need to prioritize and see where it fits into our, you know, our capital budgets.
Are we talking like 5 million or less than
Yeah,
that?
somewhere in that range. Yeah. We did explore, and they're still exploring with PG&E the possibility to use the existing conductors out there and maybe only use one pump. And, you know, install a soft start and that sort of a thing, and see if we can do it. But their engineer hasn't gotten back to us yet. That inquiry is a few months old.
Do we have a PG&E service to the pump station?
Yes.
I see.
So
Yeah, that
Paul,
would be interesting.
given the significance of the cost of the decision to begin operation of the pumps, I think what staff would do is, right, we proceed with this 100 and some thousand and install them, but we would keep in communication with the board prior to pulling that trigger, just given the significance of what that means, and not likely, but potentially align it with actions we may be taking in April if the weather doesn't participate.
Do we have a sense of how much we would say? I'm kind of compelled by this idea whether we could use the existing line with one pump, and what would be the cost differential to use that electricity versus the fuel. The fuel is obviously the substantial cost. Is it 3-to-1 savings, 1-to-1? I'm sure it's more than 1-to-1.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. It's a good question. It would be cheaper, obviously. Diesel is, you know, I think it's right now at about $3.70 or something a gallon. And these guys will probably add another $1 on top of that for service, right? So $4 or $5
Yeah.
a gallon.
I think you're talking much higher than 3 to 1. I think running a generator compared to running on PG&E is probably more like 10 to 1 or 8 to 1 or something like that. It's pretty pricey. I mean, 1,000 kilowatt must be burning about 200 gallons an hour, 300 gallons an hour, something like
No,
that.
Not quite that much. Yeah.
Not much.
It's about 100.
100. So we're talking about 500 an hour to operate versus I think it's like 130 an hour to buy the PG&E power. It depends on the demand factors and things, but maybe it's 250.
I mean, if we have time, wouldn't it be worth considering having one generator and trying to use the existing power hookup and just slowly move the water if we've got the time? I feel like it seems like we're paying a lot to be able to try to move water now, and maybe we could find a cheaper way to make the same transfer.
So we will. Yeah, it's a good thought. We would, of course, continue pursuing PG&E, you know, whether they think we can use the existing power lines. But whether you pay more using one generator versus two generators, you don't really, because you're going to use the same amount of fuel to move that same volume of water. It's just whether it takes you 90 days or 180 days. Right, if you use one generator to power one pump, it's going to take you twice as long as if you had two generators.
Yeah, I mean, but wouldn't it be cheaper? I mean, it would be cheaper. We'd have less, I'm going to guess, less emissions as well, which would be another upshot. I'm sorry if I'm missing sort of.
So if you operate the engine for 90, one engine for two engines, like two generators, right, for the 90 days, and you move 3,000 acre feet of water, I'll have to operate one engine for 180 days to move the same volume of water. It's the same emissions, just over one's over 180 days and the other's over 90 days. So the rate of emission may be less, but the total
I'm talking about using the existing power line as part of the concept. Sorry, I wasn't clear about that. What I'm asking is whether if we have time, whether it makes sense to see whether we could use the existing power line with one generator to move the water, obviously over a longer period of time. But if the power cost for moving that water is a substantial savings, maybe that's a better way to.
I'm going to jump in here, Monty, because we had some pretty large pump stations up in Portland, Oregon, where I used to work. And I think it's still unclear whether or not the lines can handle the load. And if they can't, and they have to run larger load across those lines, just purchasing the transformer to move it is a 6-month lead time often. Installing new electrical equipment is always a very lengthy process. So I think we'll have to see if we can bug PG&E to get back to us on the analysis of the system before we can really say whether or not it's even possible.
My guess, Crystal, is they already have gotten back to us. They're telling us no.
Right. Could be.
And that's the problem. You know, we don't control this situation. We're beggars here. So, you know, it's PG&E's equipment and they say yes, or they say no. You know, obviously they're interested in selling the power, but you have that issue of whether they'll give permission. You know, you can understand the birds would be uncomfortable if the lines were red. So we don't want to heat them up too much.
Yeah. But on the other subject of waiting, Director Schmidt, the water quality in Sulahuli tends to be better earlier in the year, as you might imagine. So that's a little bit of a benefit for us. It's quite a eutrophic and productive lake, if you know what I mean, in the summertime, particularly as far as taste and odors go.
And Paul, what about the aeration unit that we were going to put in? Did we ever get that installed and up and running to address the mercury?
No, that's still a study in progress at this point. We are working with the regional board and actually kind of partnering with the regional board and East Bay Mud to do some studies on the efficacy of those aerators. East Bay Mud are planning to install a hypolimnetic oxygenator for San Pablo Reservoir. And so right now we're participating in some pre-studies of that reservoir that are being conducted by Stillwater Sciences and East Bay Mud.
So go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, so we want to make sure right before we move forward with any aerator like that, that it's actually going to work and that it's effective. And there is some evidence to date that, you know, existing oxygenators that have been installed at places like Santa Clara and other areas in California and across the nation haven't been terribly effective. Maybe less to do with the chemistry, i.e., you know, the oxygenation is a good idea, but the way they were delivering that oxygen, most of the existing aerators or oxygenators are using line diffusers, and they're just not as effective as something like a Spiess cone, which is a different way of applying the oxygen to the lower levels in the reservoir.
Yeah, I think the problem, I had a French company come over and take a look at it. Their response was that the reservoir was too shallow for a good hypolimnetic aerator. The Spiess cone's an interesting idea, especially if we were to use liquid oxygen, where you wouldn't have to generate power to make it happen. That does have potential. You might want to talk to Alex Horn, or maybe Alex is already looped into it. He's had a fair amount of experience with this kind of stuff at UC Berkeley about using Spiess cones. He likes those a lot.
Yeah, he's directly involved both as a consultant to the regional board on this issue and to Stillwater.
Cool.
Second follow-up question is water quality. You guys are confident about water quality?
Yeah, even though Sulahuli is a sort of a reserve reservoir for us, it still is in our rota of sampling. And so all the data that gets collected on all of our other drinking water reservoirs, the same is true for Sulahuli, the metals analysis and all of those things. And Sulahuli is just, it's comparable to Nicatio in that respect.
As far as ambient metals, trace metals, all that kind of.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's good quality that way, Larry. It's just the problem of taste and odor. And
well,
you know,
no, it's bioaccumulation, right? That's the problem.
yeah, but you filter. Okay. So if that goes into the biology, you filter it out. You know, it doesn't get into the water supply.
Yeah, I'm talking about the State Water Board, though. That their issue is the bioaccumulation in the fish in the lake.
Yeah, but the fish stay behind, right?
Yeah.
The water leaves and the fish stay behind.
No, understood.
You're right. That's a different issue. Yes, the mercury is a whole different animal and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Paul, can you remind us the last time we pumped water from Sulahuli, just for Director Schmidt and others who may not recall?
Yes, I think the last time that Sulahuli was used was in the early 90s, which if you recall was at the sort of end of that 87 to 92 sort of extended drought. Yeah. And it, of course, constructed in, I think it was completed in 1979. And that's really the only time it's been used. So just to give you, you know, we are sort of in fairly historic times in terms of precipitation for us, right? Calendar 2020 had 20.1 inches of rain. You go back to 2013, which of course was our historic low. And after that, you've got to go back 90 years to 1929 to find sort of the next driest year. So really, you know, last year was the second driest year in 90 years.
Wow.
So it's not surprising that we find ourselves looking towards Sulahuli is my point.
Yeah.
Well, that's why they built it. You know, it never would have been built without the drought in 76. And, you know, so it makes sense. I think you're doing exactly the right thing here, getting ready. And even if it's got a little taste and odor, having water is better than not having water, even if it's a little fishy tasting.
So I think I'd like to bring this back to the question on the table. I think it's been a constructive conversation, but we have a relatively narrow issue before us today, which is this is an approval item and whether we're going to approve the rental of these generators. So I think at this point, I'd like to have a motion.
I made a motion.
Oh, sorry. Was there a second?
Second,
Okay. Do we
no,
have any-
there is now.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this item?
We do not have any public comments.
Okay. Are there any further board comments? But narrowly on this item is what I'm looking for right now. Okay.
Just, I would wait as long as you can to pull the trigger on this thing, but, you know.
On, and for clarity, what we're thinking as the board moves into a decision is that we would proceed with the contract and mobilize the generators. But prior to starting them up, which is the big cost, we would come back and have a discussion with the board.
Okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
With that, roll call vote, please, Terry.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. That brings us to item 9, the 2020 Urban Water Management Plan demand projections.
And I have that item. Good evening, Carrie Pollard, Water Efficiency Manager. I have a presentation. I'm going to pull it up here. And can everyone see that?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Very good. So with us tonight is Kat Wolfing with EKI, Environment and Water. EKI was the consultant that we worked with on this project. So if there's questions I can't answer, we'll lean on Kat. And this evening, we're going to cover the demand analysis, which is really the starting point, the initial analysis that we do that feeds into our urban water management plan. Let's try that. So just briefly, what's included in an urban water management plan, this is, of course, is a planning document that's updated every 5 years. What we do is we look at historical water demands and supplies, and we also look at projected future water demands and supplies over a 20-year planning horizon. So for this plan, it goes out to 2045. We also report out on the district status as far as our SBX 7-7, which is the 20 by 2020 targets they established about a decade ago. Once we have those demand projections, we also look at supplies under various conditions, under normal conditions, under drought conditions, and we determine whether or not we can, whether or not we have a reliable supply of water available to us to meet those demands. The Urban Water Management Plan does also have a section, a chapter on the water conservation measures that had been implemented in the past, and also asks us to look at, if there's any planned programs that we are projecting rolling out in that time period. And finally, something new to the Urban Water Management Plan is actually updating our water shortage contingency plan as a new requirement. So it also needs to be submitted with the Urban Water Management Plan. And today we're going to cover just, again, the demand analysis. So to do this project, we worked closely with the Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership members. We actually all collaborated we used a joint consultant. So that was EKI. So all of the members used the same consultant and in turn used the same methodology, which is beneficial. So we all have a clear understanding of, the process that was used as the region. And of course, all of that information does feed up to Sonoma Water as our wholesaler and for their planning as well. So jumping right in. So we started with population and employment projections was our first step. We used ABAG's 2018 data. And we use that for population, both population and employment. So the population growth was projected to be at 8.5%, and employment growth rate was at 3.8. So one question that may come up is, well, how does that compare to our 2015 Urban Water Management Plan, which was the last planning document that we utilized here, that we submitted to the state, and it aligns quite nicely. They use a similar. They use ABAG as well when they did the 2015 Urban Water Management Plan. So it's consistent. Once we have the demand and, once we have the population and employment projections, then we want to use those to determine, or we use them to determine how many accounts we project to have within each of our types of sectors, with each of our types of customer classes. And once we knew those number of accounts, we also needed then to decide on what was the demand factors we would utilize for and apply to each of those various types of accounts. And to do this, we looked at various scenarios. We looked at pre-drought demands, so water use per account prior to drought, gallons per day per account prior to drought, prior to demands, prior to drought. And then we also looked at post-drought usage. And we acknowledged that there probably would be some opportunity or some instances where we would see a partial rebound, right? So we wouldn't expect it to be, water demands to be up at that pre-drought level, but we also don't anticipate them to remain really low. And so we had to decide which of these demand factors we were going to use for each of our types of accounts. I do want to note on this slide that we did separate single family and single family residential accounts into two categories. So we had existing accounts, and then we also had new accounts. And you'll notice there that the demand factors are different. This is not something that's unique to Marin, but it's actually seen across the state, where new accounts tend to use more water than existing accounts. There's a couple of different reasons why that have come up in a number of studies, and that really comes down to an increase in number of fixtures, so more leaks, etc. There's more fixtures, and then also possibly establishing landscape for new accounts. So nevertheless, in looking at our data locally, within our service area, we actually also saw that this was consistent for us too. So we wanted to distinguish those two types of users. So once we had these options, we then had to select which water demand factors we wanted to apply to each type of account. And what we did here is, you can see for all of our residential accounts, we use a partial rebound. The reason why we selected a partial rebound was because we know that the state has regulations that they're rolling out, and we anticipate that they will, drive residential demands down. Whereas our irrigation users, which would be the recycled water and the irrigation accounts, and partially some of our mixed use business and institutional accounts as well. Irrigation, we think with climate change, that's going to drive back up. That will be an increase. We'll see an increase in demand. So we wanted to be conservative in our estimates and apply a pre-drought demand factor. As far as businesses and institutional, again, the state has some regulations that they are currently developing and rolling out. We are not clear what those regulations will be and how they will actually impact demands. And so as far as right now, what we want to consider, again, we want to be conservative. So we applied a pre-drought demand factor to the accounts. And so once we had those types of demand factors selected, we applied them to the number of accounts we were projecting into the future. And we have our projected potable water demands. So there's a lot going on here, so let me kind of walk you through it. So the dark blue dash line is the projections that we calculated out to 2045. The light blue is our actual production amounts that we've seen. It's labeled demands. It's kind of a nuance, right, of the state of they refer to them as demands, but for us, it's actually our produced water. I'll note that it stops in 2019, or 2019 was kind of established as our baseline because 2020 was the year we did the analysis and we needed a full year of analysis to run the modeling. So it's actually 2020 is not graphed on here as it actually occurred. Let's see what else. These demands do not incorporate conservation potential or future conservation programs. And there's a reason for that. And that's because the state wants us to provide to them demands that are not impacted by our conservation programs, right? They want to know, they acknowledge that there's a number of factors that may go into achieving those savings. And so they don't want us to assume upfront that we will be able to meet them, regardless. So these have unconstrained demands. So, yeah, go ahead, Sylvia.
I'm sorry to interrupt,
that's okay.
really important because these plans do drive a lot of things. And and it's been a while. I had a lot to do with this 10 years ago when these, new requirements for reporting were put in place. But I could be obviously wrong about this, but it does not make any sense to me that these projections don't include at least some range of conservation other than passive conservation, because this drives a lot of our planning. And if this doesn't include what can be achieved through conservation, then we're just going backwards. And it doesn't, I'm just not understanding that. So are you saying we are precluded or it's simply a preference on the part of the state?
My understanding is that the state wants us to submit, that we have a section on conservation, and if we want to include any information in there, we can. But as far as our projected demands, they want unconstrained demands. So not to apply our future conservation to them beyond passive. Passive savings, of course, can't be teased out, so they are included.
Okay, thanks.
I'll note that in 2015, when we did the last urban water management plan, let's see if I get my mouse here. That will be, this is where demands were in 2014, 2015, when we submitted the last urban water management plan. So, it is fairly close as far as the slope we're projecting, and they didn't anticipate. I don't think they were thinking that demands were going to drop as low as they did. And so we are still seeing some rebound from the last drought, as even in now in you can see from the curve there the increase. And then finally, I think that was all my notes from the slide. And then finally, we did the same process for recycled water. And you can see here there's a sharp decline because the recycled water plant has been down for the last 2 years. We are anticipating it being up and running once again by 2025. And we do anticipate once the new recycled water plant is up and running, we will be able to meet all of our recycled water demands with the water that's supplied from the recycled water plant. Which historically, we've had to provide some makeup water, some potable makeup water to our recycled water customers to ensure we could meet those demands. And down the road, we won't have to do that. So finally, next steps. This urban water management plan, of course, requires us to demonstrate, the whole point is to demonstrate we can meet our future demands with our current supply, or with, if we needed more supply, what would that look like? And it looks like because of those projected demands are actually less than what we were supplying in the prior years, it shouldn't be an issue, but we are still kind of walking through the supply side. We'll incorporate those demands, compare them to our water supply under various scenarios, and then that will be included in the urban water management plan. And the other piece, big one, is the water shortage contingency plan. And so all of these items, this isn't the only opportunity for the board to hear them or see about them. Of course, we'll be bringing them back as the various pieces are pulled together to get your input and insight. Ultimately, the urban water management plan will be formally adopted by the board and needs to be submitted to DWR by July 1st of 2021. I'd be happy to answer any other questions you all may have.
Thanks, Carrie. So am I correct then that the place that we could be including the opportunities that we have in front of us for reuse and greater efficiencies would be, where we are analyzing, how we're going to meet these demands. So essentially converting what has been discussed in the past as demand management into supply.
I'm not sure. I don't know if Paul or anyone else has any insight on that, how we would go about that.
Right. My concern is that I don't want the urban water management plan to be a document that forces us into expenditures that are not rational for this district, forcing us to go and look for very expensive water supply augmentation to meet this, to meet the state's requirements, when, whatever gap we're seeing could be addressed, far more sustainably and in a more climate resilient way and in a more, frankly, equitable and affordable way, if we were to invest instead in efficiency and reuse options.
Director Kohler, President Kohler, I'm not an expert in this area, but I have seen that conservation does play into supply, especially in dry years. Potentially, that is a factor. So I think you're correct in that statement, even though it's not in the demand piece.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to note that in the resiliency piece, the conservation certainly will play into it. And, you know, unlike maybe where we were 10 years ago or where some agencies are now, where this effort is somewhat deterministic on a major capital investment, that's not really where the district is, you know, nor, you know, growth limiting issues. So this is, we expect it to be more of an update than some very consequential game changing document. But we do hear you with conservation, and we'll be giving it a lot of thought. And when we come back on the next pieces, we'll address it more specifically.
That's great because, you know, we haven't really done a deep analysis, at least for some time now, on what we could be achieving with, you know, more aggressive. I mean, we've been very fortunate. We've kept demand. I mean, even what you're projecting now is far below what we anticipated, you know, 15 years ago or so when Larry and I first joined the board. And that is due entirely to our conservation efforts, which, you know, it's been a very small investment compared to what we were being asked to consider with desal. Not that I have anything against desal. I'm just saying, you know, we were able to achieve, we are now far, far below where we were projected to be in exactly this document, you know, 15 years ago. So I think it's important that we look back and really understand that record of achievement, and that we also, you know, really take a hard look at the potential, because, you know, my sense is that we have really barely scratched the surface in terms of what is achievable here in terms of reuse and efficiency.
I think those are excellent points, Cynthia. I have a question, and a great job, Carrie. It was a very interesting presentation. I have a question about mandatory conservation in the April 1st and San Quentin. I assume nobody here has been around long enough. Perhaps Jack remembers back a little bit to the 70s with the water district. I don't think anybody else does. About how did San Quentin do in the 70s in terms of conservation, because they're 3% of our total water usage, and you know, by far bigger than anybody else in Marin. And you know, if they don't do a good job, they could put a squeeze on us, and I'm sure there's a difficulty in motivating their constituents to conserve water. So if anybody's got any thoughts on that, I'd be interested in that, or if you want to bring it up at a later time, that would be great.
Director Russell, it's Paul Sellier. I think that I don't know about during the 70s, but I do know that the sort of controls that have been placed on inmates relate to flushometers, where they, you know, just that would limit how many times that they can flush the toilets in each cell.
And you think, is that a mechanical limit or it's just a policy?
I think it's mechanical, yeah.
Yeah, because they used to send out Morse code on the toilets. You know, that was one of their tricks. Then what I recall them doing is shutting the water off. Maybe they've advanced beyond that, but that's what I remember them doing in order to control that water usage, was just to cut the water, and then it's only on for so many hours a day. But I don't know. There's, speaking to what Cynthia was talking about too, there's some great graphs in this report of how things change on our water demand over time. And there's this one that shows this big hump back into the, before the 70s, or around the 70s, 80s. And then it just drops off. It comes down to 115 gallons per person per day. It's figure table 3-5. I don't know, the figure doesn't have a number, but it's quite an interesting curve if you get a chance to look at it.
Couple questions. The couple things that jump out at me is, the first is non-revenue water. So we're losing about 3,000 acre feet a year on non-revenue water. So that would seem to be something we should think about, you know. And I know we've talked about leak detection and whether that number can be cut significantly because it seems pretty consistent to be between 2,000 and 3,000 acre feet a year. The other thing is on the growth projection, they're using ABAG numbers, which Marin has never met ABAG's projections. That's not to say we won't, but historically we haven't. So I think it shows an increase in the next 20 years of 4,000 single family, 500 or 300 multifamily, 4,500 units in the next 20 years. Certainly possible, but historically, Marin has not met the goals. So projections I know are a tough thing. And my last thing, and it's kind of a little bit of a joke, but the map of our district does not include Fairfax at the beginning of this. That is a big omission. Everybody
Thank you
else,
for pointing
that's
that
gotta
out.
be-
Kat is on the call. She'll fix that, I'm sure.
That's got to be
Just
political,
stick it up
don't you
now.
think?
Yeah.
take a look. I'm not making it up.
I think your comment is an excellent one, Larry. If you look at table 3-2, the non-revenue water is the second biggest element of our water supply to single family residences. And it's consistently that big. Now, one of the problems to recognize is the rumbles I get in the water business are that the difference in the unused water is, at least in many people's opinion, that it's the difference between large meters and small meters being more accurate. So that the error isn't, at least in many cases, and I think that's probably true in MMWD's case, it's an error, it's not really lost. It's just not accounted for because we put in our system, we put 10 in and get 9 out, or something like that. That's where the difference comes in. It's because the huge meters at the water treatment plants aren't as accurate as the little meters that tally up the water usage. At least that's one of the theories I've been told to me.
Yeah, well, it looks like it's worth looking into because it's
Yes, sir.
a big number.
Just to follow up on those comments, we were in fact talking about that today, and a regional effort that's been in the working for quite some time is kicking off, where we're sharing a consultant that's going to bring the latest and greatest technology, and there's quite a lot in terms of leak detection throughout the system, and start thinking about what we can do using this new technology that may help advance. We have a fairly active program, and we'll update the board on that as well. And we find leaks with our leak detection program, put in work orders and go up there and fix the leaks. But there's probably more there that we'd be able to find as well.
Yeah.
Don't forget to calibrate the meters too.
Good point.
Yeah, it does jump out. It's a big number.
Yeah, it's one of the numbers in the water business, Larry, that everybody's after that number. I mean, in some systems it's 50%.
Right.
So, that's 50% is not unusual. In fact, when I talk to my European cohorts about the numbers that we produce, they laugh at them. They think they're ridiculously low, unrealistically low. Let me put it that way. That we're not doing as well as we think we are. That's what they think. So,
Okay.
that's just something, food for thought.
Right. And the system losses are, they're ubiquitous. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing what we can, and we're in a position.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Any more comments on this item from the board or staff? Okay, well, I'm going to add my thanks to everybody else's. Carrie, I think you did a fantastic job. This is really clear, really understandable. I hope, once again, I'll just keep repeating that this gets posted to the website so that people can find it and know about it. Is there any public comment on this item, Terry?
We do not have any.
Okay, then we will move on to item 10, future.
I'd like to say one more thing, Cynthia. I'd just like to thank EKI for doing an excellent job. I think the report looks really good and quite comprehensive.
Yes, I was giving Carrie all the credit, but yes, thank you for that.
Thanks a lot.
So moving on to item 10, future meeting schedule and agenda items.
So there have been no changes to what's written on our on the staff report. We will have a meeting, the next board meeting on the 16th. And then also we will have our communications meeting the next day and then operations meeting that same week.
Any board comments or staff item comments on this item? Okay, I'm assuming no public comments on this item.
There are no public comments.
And we are adjourned. Take care, everybody.
Okay, cool. Thank you. See you.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.